Ducks fans, are you ready? You are listening to the Ducks and Pucks podcast with your hosts, Mike Walters and Eddie Jones. This is the #1 home for Anaheim Ducks talk and analysis. Here we go.
Welcome back to the show. This is your host, Mike Walters, along with my co-host, Eddie Jones, and we have a good show for you this week. We're going to talk a lot about the coaches around the league. We're also going to talk about Bruce Boudreau getting hired by Minnesota and talk about the NHL and the playoffs and the next 4 teams that have advanced. So we're going to get you caught up on all of that action. We'll start with the coaches around the league, Eddie, for the Ducks, basically, who's in and out. And a lot of coaches have been picked up this week. The field's been narrowing a little bit, Eddie, as Sutter re-signed with the LA Kings. Crawford and Boucher both got picked up by Ottawa. So we've seen the field get a little bit smaller for Anaheim.
Yeah, and some of the names that we thought we were realistically going to be in on was definitely, Sutter, with him not re-signing. There was still a good chance he was going to resign. It's just weird when you see a guy like that, last so long before they sign a contract with him, probably working out all the details, but now he's off the table, and that was probably the #1 choice for the Ducks. And then you see 2 guys go to one team, and Guy Boucher and Marc Crawford both going to the Ottawa Senators. Guy Boucher obviously being the head coach and Marc Crawford being the assistant, and that takes off 2 guys off the table too. And I know we all thought Boudreau was going to go to Ottawa, but it turns out he ends up going to Minnesota, and he's got a good chance to win with that team too. I think it was a little bit surprising. You and me were pretty much set on him going to Ottawa, being close to home and with a young team and everything, but he flips the script and ends up with the Wild.
Yeah, I agree, and there were a lot of other people too that thought he would go to Ottawa as well, since he has family out that way. And we'll get to some of the comments that he made, because I know several fans had some reactions to some of the things that he said, actually directly aimed at our own fans and at the players on the Ducks, specifically Getzlaf and Perry. So we'll get to that. But as far as the coaching search for Anaheim is going, that's kind of interesting. Another name came up this last week, Luke Richardson, also from the Ottawa organization. He was assistant coach there for 3 years, and then he was the coach in the AHL for 4 years. And in both of those positions, the teams, the NHL and AHL Ottawa teams, respectively, made the playoffs a couple of years each. So, he had a decent run. The last season wasn't too great. But the interesting thing about Luke, and you and I talked about this, Eddie, is that he did not get picked up by Ottawa. He's been looking for an NHL coaching job. They went with Guy Boucher instead, and then obviously brought in Crawford as the assistant. So now he's looking to go to another team. Obviously, the Ducks and Calgary are the 2 that are out there, looking for coaches. But it's kind of a red flag, Eddie, when you see a guy get passed over, not once, but really twice in Ottawa.
Especially by his own team too, and I think that that might speak to the Senators wanting to look for maybe a more experienced coach and not wanting to go the AHL route. You sometimes see teams do that. Obviously, there's examples that we've mentioned before of Tampa Bay picking up John Cooper from the AHL and Detroit going with Blashill after Babcock left. So some teams decide to go the AHL route, and Ottawa, I think this one is some more experience, but it does speak to the fact they didn't think that he was the guy for the job. And I know the Ducks are probably interested, but they have a huge list, and we put out a big list of our own too, and they're just going to be pretty much interviewing everybody out there right now.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, I would stay away, or at least investigate. If you're going to consider Luke Richardson, I would definitely be talking to several people in Ottawa as to the fact of why he was not picked up as a coach or assistant coach as well, because there has to be some reasoning. I mean, maybe it's nothing that's a big deal, but still, it's something that raises your eyebrow, and you kind of go, okay, what's going on here with the Senators and his relationship? So. I don't know if he'd be a good fit. I mean, he's done okay in Ottawa, but there'd have to be some research done in terms of the relationship there. And as well this week, some of the other names that some have come up, multiple times, and new ones have come up too. So we've seen internally McLean's name come up, of course. I've also heard, and it hasn't been out there as much in the media, but Trent Yanni's name's been thrown around as well, which we expected, as both of them being the assistants. The other ones that come up from outside has been Travis Green and Mike Yeo, and we know that the Ducks are talking to both of them. There's been some reports about that as well, Eddie. So it's going to be interesting to see which one of these guys may come in. One situation I thought that could happen is maybe McLean comes in and he's the head coach, and maybe you put Richardson in as an assistant. I mean, I know he wants the head coaching job, but maybe that's something you try to do instead, and bringing him in as a head coach. They both came from Ottawa and worked together there, so there's a good relationship there. That might be something to do. Otherwise, I don't really know what the Ducks are going to do as far as picking up a new coach. They may look outside, and another name like Richardson may surface that we don't know. That's kind of what I'm leaning towards right now. The only other option possibly could be Dallas Eakins. Sadly, the San Diego Gulls lost to Ontario Reign yesterday, and they got knocked out in that series, 4-1. So maybe that's another option, Eddie.
Yeah, and really nothing's out of the question right now. I mean, out of nowhere, we saw Ottawa sign two guys who were in the running for head coaching jobs and hire one of them as an assistant. So, that's not out of the question. I mean, I think McLean has to be the front runner now with Sutter being signed. I think he's one of the best fits if you're going to go with a guy with some NHL experience. Obviously, losing Boucher and Crawford to Ottawa opens that up for him. But there's still some other guys out there, and I know we've mentioned Travis Green, and it's still a risk, obviously, having a guy with no NHL experience. But Mike Yeo is another name that's out there. Randy Carlyle's still out there. There's a lot of guys still out there. Only a couple of names got scratched off a pretty big list, so there's still a lot of time to see who the Ducks are going to hire as their head coach.
Yeah, I think the key in this process, Eddie, for the Ducks is, and this has come up this week as well, as some people have talked about Murray taking his time. Obviously, there's teams playing in the playoffs, and some have suggested that maybe he's waiting to see how some of these teams do. Obviously, the Islanders, got knocked out. We saw Nashville get knocked out, Dallas as well. So we've seen some of these teams, the Capitals too, which we were all surprised, and we'll talk about all this a little bit later in the show. But in terms of the coaching aspect, some people have suggested maybe Murray has been waiting to see how some of these teams do. And then, if an assistant or a head coach becomes available because of, a team getting knocked out in the playoffs. So maybe he's taking a wait and see approach, Eddie.
Yeah, and I think, St. Louis was definitely a big wait and see with Ken Hitchcock. I think they're almost in the same boat as the Ducks. This year we have to make at least the conference finals, or his job could have been, he could have been relieved of his duties. And I think that making the conference finals this year, and I think that locks up his job. I mean, I don't think it's Stanley Cup or bust for them. I think they still have a pretty big window with Tarasenko and Schwartz and Fabry, and their core is pretty young right now. But with the teams already been knocked out, he might have been waiting just to see if Ken Hitchcock becomes available, or somebody else. The Islanders being knocked out and some other teams, just to see if he can add some more names to his list. But with nobody really making any moves coaching wise, the guys that are out there now are the guys that are going to be available, a month from now. So I think that the decision should have to come pretty soon.
Yeah, and I think the key, whoever they bring in, I think the biggest issue, and I think this is why, you've seen Eric Stevens mention Randy Carlyle, and a few other people have mentioned his name as well, is maybe you have to bring in somebody that has experience, that's won a Stanley Cup, and can basically take the stars on this team, Kessler, Perry, and Getzlaf, and guide them in the right direction. Because there's been a lot of criticism, not aimed so much at Kessler, obviously, but definitely Perry and Getzlaf. So I think you're going to need an experienced coach to come in, set the path straight for everybody, and get the season going next year. I mean, I think if you bring in a guy that's, a little bit younger in age, or only has the AHL experience, I don't know how much, a Perry and a Getzlaf are going to, respect that person. I'm not saying that they wouldn't, but, it's a little bit different scenario if you bring in someone that's been there, done that, as opposed to someone that's newer. I kind of lean more towards an experienced coach, though I don't really agree with Carlisle, obviously, because there was issues in the past, and I don't know if that situation's changed, and obviously that's mainly Perry and Getzlaf that had issue with them back then. But if that hasn't changed, then that wouldn't really be a good fit. But like I said, someone that's been there, done that, that's a proven success in the playoffs. But it's kind of scary because there's not a lot of people out there, Eddie, that are in that boat in terms of coaches that are available.
Yeah, and the guys that have won a Stanley Cup, it kind of goes down. I mean, Yo won a Stanley Cup as assistant coach with the Penguins. I mean, Guy Boucher was with the Lightning. Obviously Randy Carlyle won the Cup as a coach of the Ducks in '07, and then you've got Bob Hartley who won the Cup with the Colorado Avalanche way back in the early 2000s. So, I mean, those are your options right now if you want to go with an experienced guy. And I think it is a good option for the Ducks to go with someone with some experience. I mean, the window is definitely closing. Getzlaf, Perry, and Kessler are getting higher and higher into the 30s every year. So, I mean, there's only so long that window is going to stay open for before their play dips down, and you're going to have to focus on rebuilding and stocking up some younger guys. So, I think if they think having a guy like Travis Green or Sheldon Keefe or even Luke Richardson come in and guys with limited experience, it definitely could be raise a problem if the players don't you know if the players don't accept them because of their experience or because of their history.
Yeah, I agree, and that's what I think Murray's trying to consider right now is whether to go with an experienced coach or one that's not as experienced and go outside the box. And I mean, honestly, we've seen Murray do that several times with the draft picks and the trades and things like that. So, I mean, there's a possibility that there's some other name out there that we haven't considered or that other people haven't either, and he goes that route. So. It's going to be interesting, the next week or two. Hopefully this gets locked down, and then we can, move forward and keep our eyes on the draft, and then obviously all the free agency, which we've talked about at length too, because the Ducks have several RFAs and UFAs as well, and they're not going to be able to keep everybody. So it'd be nice to get the coach in place and then go, on to that next step, Eddie, because that's what we're going to have to deal with, coming up here in June and July.
Yeah, and it's not like it's an assistant GM or a GM where the draft is something you need to have a head coach for. They have a lot of time to wait and really make the best decision, and maybe they want to build their team and then wait and see what team they're going to have and then hire a coach. There's a lot of ways they could do this. They could decide to hire him before the draft to get it done, so all they can do is focus on the draft, and that's something that is definitely realistic, and it would be a good option for Murray to do if he just wants to focus on the draft, focus on the free agents, focus on his UFAs and RFAs and everything like that. But he could go the other route and build a team first and re-sign guys, let some guys go, make some trades, obviously go through the draft and look at the team he has and decide which coach is the best fit for that team. So I don't think there's any hurry for the Ducks right now, and obviously we've seen that so far with some names coming off the board.
You bring up an interesting point because a lot of people really haven't mentioned that is they've been talking and they've been asking me questions about the coaching situation and when is Murray going to make a decision and we have to hurry up and all of that. And you bring up a good point. Maybe Murray decides to build up the team and get the players that he can keep and trade and make some moves elsewhere. And once he determines what his roster is going to be, because we know it's going to change pretty significantly. I mean, there's a core that's locked up with this team and is going to come back, but there's also especially the bottom six forwards that, I mean, outside of Garbutt coming back next year with his one more year, you don't really know what the bottom six is going to be. You have McGinn and Perron to figure out, obviously Raquel and Lindholm are the big ones that, we've beat a dead horse about those, the goalie situation. I mean, there's so much stuff that Murray really has to consider this summer. It might not be a bad idea, like you said, Eddie, for him to slow it down and think, okay, how am I going to figure out my forwards? How am I going to figure out the defense too? I mean, Vatanin's another name too that we've talked about at length. So it might not be a bad idea to go through the draft, get your team ready for next year, and then go, okay, this is my team and this is who I want to have coach. It's an idea that a lot of people haven't brought up. Maybe it's not something that's, traditional in the way some people run a team, but if the Ducks were to do that, I wouldn't be upset either. I mean, either way, if they pick someone the next couple of weeks or they wait till then, I trust whatever they're going to do. But I do think that that's a good option that you mentioned, Eddie.
Yeah, and it's not like you're fighting with 4 or 5 teams right now to sign a head coach. I mean, Ottawa's already done their business. Minnesota's done theirs. it's really only the Ducks in Calgary right now who have no head coach. So there's a lot of guys out there, and there's only two teams really looking to hire right now. So I think, that plays into it as well. I think if there's no coach hired by the end of May, I think Murray's obviously it would seem like he's made his decision and he's going to focus on the draft and free agency. So the draft in June and free agency obviously on July 1st, and make sure he's got all the guys signed that he wants signed. Focus on some trades at the draft because it's going to be a busy draft for the Ducks, and it's going to be a busy free agency as well. Like you said, the bottom six with guys like McGinn and Perron. Stewart, Perry, those guys are some guys who might not be there next year, and he's gonna have to focus on how he wants to build his team. And though we already mentioned that there might be some trades done at the draft involving maybe Anderson or Gibson or Vatanen as well, so that's an option for the Ducks too. And if it's not done by the end of May, we could really see him wait until maybe late July, early August. It could even go that long.
Yeah, exactly. It could take some time. And, we found out that one team wasn't going to waste time, and that team was the Minnesota Wild that ended up picking up Bruce Boudreau pretty quickly there. As we mentioned earlier, he's now signed a contract for the next 4 years, a little over $10 million with the Wild. And it's going to be interesting times in Minnesota. Obviously, they're excited to have him there. We all know Minnesota's made the playoffs the last 4 years, but they haven't been able to get past the second round. So they're locked down. The Ducks don't have to worry about, Minnesota trying to take any other, candidates out there because obviously Bruce is now there. It's going to be interesting to watch Minnesota, though, and see what happens. I think they'll do well in the playoffs. I'm sorry, they'll do well in the regular season, but it'll be interesting to see how far they go in the playoffs in the next couple seasons, Eddie.
Yeah, and it's kind of been disappointing for them. I remember when way back when they were able to take Parise and Suter in the same year and bring them to their hometown, and obviously in Minnesota, and then everybody said, well, this is going to be a Stanley Cup favorite now, and they're going to be good for the next 5 to 10 years even. Like that's how good everybody thought they're going to be. They're locked up for a long time, and they've kind of been disappointing over the last few seasons, kind of barely making the playoffs and some missing out on others. And they still have a very good team. Parise's still there, Suter's still there. Vanek, Palmerville's there, Mikko Koivu's there. And it's kind of a similar build to the Ducks. They've got some aging stars on their team, over 30 now, and a couple young guys in Granlund and Coyle and Niederreiter. And a very young blue line. They've got Mike Riley, Matt Dumba, Jonas Brodin, and Jared Spurgeon, who are all, a couple of those guys are 21, 22, and then Spurgeon being 26 is the second oldest on that blue line, only to Suter. So it's a kind of a similar makeup too, and it'll be interesting to see what he does with this team. I think they still have, a lot of potential in their team. I think they can still go far. They have a pretty good core in place, and I think they just need the right head coach, and they might have got that now in Bruce.
And of course, the big story too this week was some of the comments that Bruce made. He held a press conference at the Xcel Energy Center in Minnesota, and he made some comments about some of the players and some of the fans in regards to Anaheim. And of course, some people, obviously they brought it to my attention, and we talked about it because people were upset. I thought the comments were a little interesting. I mean, we'll kind of go with the fan comment first, if you will. He talked about basically, he said, quote, the fact that the whole state of Minnesota is hockey nuts, I thought it would be a real interesting difference coming from Anaheim. And, some fans got upset about that comment, kind of thought it was, a little parting shot at us. I didn't really think a big deal of it. I thought some people kind of made it a bigger deal of this comment, Eddie. I mean, you and I talked about Hiller and his comments too, when he left. And obviously people got upset about that too, because it was similar to what Boudreau said. And, was it necessary? Probably not. He probably didn't need to say it, but I don't know. It didn't really upset me too much. I mean, more than I do because you live in Canada and you see it with Toronto and obviously, the Midwest teams, Minnesota, Chicago, things like that. I mean, obviously hockey is big up there, and down here we have so many different sports and things to do. I don't know. I mean, I think the fans here have been very good, and I think we've gotten even stronger, and especially in the last 10 years with the Ducks winning the Cup, and then obviously the Kings winning, and the Sharks have been, now they're in the Western Conference Final, and I think California fans have gotten, very into hockey, especially with the AHL teams coming out too. So, I'm not really mad at what he's saying, but maybe it was a little bit unnecessary.
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, we've seen that with Hiller's comments too. And I know people got to realize he's not calling out the fans who go to every single game and who are who are the core fans of the team and all that. He's just kind of stating as a whole that Minnesota is more of a hockey state than California, and I don't really think he's wrong either. And that's not to say that the Ducks don't have great fans, and that California isn't a great hockey city now. I mean, it obviously is. If you look at the last 7 or 8 years, there's always been a California team in the Western Conference Final, and that speaks to how California has developed hockey in the state. But Minnesota has always been about hockey. I mean, they have some very, very good NCAA teams, and they get a lot of turnout for them. And it is a hockey state, and obviously you can come up to Canada and you can see every city is a hockey city too. And I think it is a little bit more of a fanatic of environment and than in Anaheim, but. I mean, I'm not too disappointed by the comments either. Obviously, I don't live there, but being a fan of the team, it kind of hits you a little bit, saying, it feels like he's calling you out as a fan. But I think, like I said, he's just kind of mentioning that it's a bit of a different environment, and I don't really think he's wrong either. So.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, yeah. I mean, Minnesota's a hockey state. Maybe they're a little bit more nuts than we are, but you know what? We're getting pretty nuts too. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it's the way it is down. I mean, I went to one of the goal games this season, and the fans there are all into it. I mean, they're crazy rabid into it. So, I mean, I think, like you said, he's maybe just talking about the difference going up there and how it's going to be, and like I said, I didn't really take it too much of of a negative connotation towards us. I really took the other comments I thought were more interesting towards Ovechkin, Getzlaf, and Perry. He talked about how, and this was the quote that was put out there on the internet. Out of Minnesota is that quote, as much as I like Ovechkin and Getzlaf and Perry, you don't need those guys to win. So that comment came out, and that one to me was more of the interesting one of the two, because it's kind of a weird comment because it's like he's trying to pump up himself, and I can win without those guys, but then it's like, well, you didn't win with those guys. So it's kind of like, I mean, what are you really saying? And, it's kind of confusing, Eddie. I mean, it's almost like, I mean, and you do have stars in Minnesota. So I don't know if the Minnesota Stars are like, well, you have Parise, you have Suter, you have Vanek, Koivu, some guys are more aging than others, but you still have these guys. You have Dubnyk, who's, a pretty quality goaltender. I mean, I don't know. I just thought that comment was kind of interesting. I don't know if it was a shots fired towards, the Stars so much, or more him just trying to tell Minnesota, that because he also said that, he said, quote, you can do it as a team, and that they can win without necessarily relying on a couple people. And I think that's what he meant, but I just thought it was very strange for him to mention those three superstars in the comments. I thought he could have said it a different way.
Yeah, and it is weird when you mention that because he did mention the superstars, so it's almost like he's saying you can win without superstars, so you can win without Getzlaf, Perry, and Ovechkin. But I mean, Parise is definitely a superstar in the NHL. Suter is a superstar in the NHL. I mean, Koivu and Vanek and Palmerville are very good players as well. So, I mean, I get that he wants to say you can win with just a team and you don't need to rely on superstars. But, I mean, the Ducks didn't always rely on Getzlaf and Perry, and they won games without them as well. Obviously, they didn't go far in the playoffs this year, but it's if you're gonna mention a team who's gonna win as a team, I think Minnesota isn't the best the best option to say you're gonna win without superstars. You could look at the Tampa Bay Lightning right now, who've won games without Bishop and without Strawman and without obviously Stamkos, who's a superstar either. So I mean that if he was in Tampa and he said, oh, we can win without a guy like Steven Stamkos and we can win without Ben Bishop, it would make sense, but. Definitely Parise and Suter are superstars. So it's kind of again, almost an unnecessary and just an awkward comment for him to really bring up.
Yeah, and if I'm Getzlaf and Perry, as all of you know, they've taken a lot of heat and over the last couple of weeks from the season, and then obviously, of course, the past now 4 playoffs that they've lost. I would use it as motivation, Eddie. That's the way I look at it. I mean, I wouldn't look at it as, Boudreau so much shots fired, if you will, kind of a thing, though it kind of is. I would look at it as like, you know what? Okay, fine. Go to Minnesota. We'll see you next year when the Ducks play them. And obviously that first game in Anaheim, we'll have that date circled, all of us, and we'll be anticipating that game. But if I'm Getzlaf and Perry, I take it as a positive in the sense that I'm going to use that as motivation to do better next season. Not just the season, obviously the playoffs. That's the way I would take it. I don't think it was necessarily a personal shot at them, but do it. Come out next season on fire, and maybe the Ducks meet Minnesota next year in the Western Conference Final, and the Ducks knock them out. I mean, I don't know. We'll have to see. I mean, there's a lot that has to go on, obviously, as we've already mentioned, in the next couple months. But that's the way I would take those comments, Eddie, if I'm those two guys, Getzlaf and Perry.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's how they'll take it too. I mean, they're clutch guys, so they understand how it works, and I'm sure they're not hurt by the comments that he's made. I mean, they get it too. He's a coach of a new team now. They got to move on. I think they're waiting to see who's going to coach this team next year, and they're ready to make up for this season and do better next year. And obviously they want to do that. They obviously want to win another cup or two before they have to retire. So they're going to be fired up next year, and then hopefully they can make it farther than they did this year.
Yeah, and speaking of the playoffs, it's gotten narrowed down to 4 teams. The 4 teams you and I thought would made it. Tampa Bay and Pittsburgh playing in the East. Have the St. Louis Blues and the San Jose Sharks in the West. Obviously, when we talked about it last week, the series between Tampa Bay and the Islanders, and then Pittsburgh and Washington, were not so much in doubt. I mean, they're both teams are up 3-1, so it wasn't hard for us to go with who we thought was going to win. But what's interesting was in the West, you had both games go to Game 7s. St. Louis goes into Dallas and just straight up destroys them, beats them 6-1 in Dallas. And you also have San Jose at home, and you see them also dismantle Nashville 5-0. You saw the video of Rene losing it, pulling a Jonathan Quick and breaking his stick on the post, and them getting knocked out. And that's where I was surprised, Eddie. I mean, you and I both thought that the Blues and the Sharks would win, but I watched both those games, and I was just really amazed at how they each dominated those Game 7s.
Yeah, for Dallas, it's kind of the story of the year for them. We talked about how their team and their goaltending, they have a great goal scoring bat and Sagan, Spezza, they can score a lot of goals. Their defense is a little bit better this year, but their goaltending has always been the question. And they played great for 3 games this season for that series, and they played terrible for 4 games, and that was that was how it worked out. You see in Game 7, Lettinen starts, does bad, Niemi comes in and can't do any better, and it ends up hurting them, and they lose Game 7. They get blown out on home ice, and it's embarrassing for them. And we talked about how Calgary was probably the only team looking for a goalie in the offseason. Well, I think you can add Dallas into that mix now, because there's definitely some questions there, and they thought having Lettinen and Niemi this year was going to be the key for them, and obviously that didn't work out. So they could be a team that's going to be in on a guy like Anderson or Gibson if the Ducks decide to trade one of them.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility for people to keep their eye on, as Dallas may be one of those teams that the Ducks look to make some kind of a move, in regard to the goalie situation. Like you said, the way that series went, neither one of the goalies could, be consistent for, the entire series. And we've talked about this before. As far as teams trying to ride 2 goalies in the playoffs, it really doesn't work. It just doesn't. You can try one for one series and then one for another series, but when you're changing them out, every game or every 2 games, I forgot what the stats were. There was that article that was out, but there was like one team in the last 50 years that it's happened. So I'm not saying it couldn't happen again, but this is another case where it went that way, Eddie. It didn't work out for them. I mean, granted, they didn't have Tyler Seguin, so I mean that obviously hurt them a little bit too. But you can't take away from the Blues. The Blues played extremely well this series, in a couple of the games, not just Game 7. They really handed it to Dallas, and now they're going to face San Jose today. in game one, and that's going to be an interesting series, Eddie. Same thing with the Sharks. The Sharks, they took out Nashville. They had, obviously, we talked about the controversial overtime goal that was taken away. I really thought San Jose should have won anyways, but, they still won the series. So they're going to go on a battle. And this is a series that I think is going to for sure go at least 6 games, if not 7.
Yeah, and it has to, and St. Louis finally, fulfilling their potential and making the conference final, and the Sharks, long overdue making it back to the conference finals, and it's going to be a great matchup. It's a team that can score a lot of goals against a team that prides itself defensively, and obviously the Blues can score a lot of goals too. They have some great goal scorers, and Backes has been scoring for them in the playoffs, and obviously Vladimir Tarasenko is their 40 goal scorer this year, so he's the guy who's going to be key for them in this series, but. It's going to be a big goaltending battle too, and Martin Jones has been good, and Brian Elliott's been good as well. So I think it's two evenly matched teams, and it's definitely going to go far. I'd be surprised to see a team take this in 4 or 5. I think that would be a little bit ridiculous. I think it definitely has to go 6 or 7.
Yeah, and I think you and I both agree. We think the Blues will prevail in this one. Not that it's going to be easy, but that's who we're picking in the West, right, Eddie?
Yeah, I really think the Blues are the team this year. I think I have them winning the cup in one of my brackets. I think they're a complete team finally. I think Tarasenko is playing the best hockey he's played in his career. Fabry has come up for them and he's been huge for them. Stastny, Backes, Schwartz, just you name it. That team is firing on all cylinders right now. They've got some great depth. A very good blue line, and Brian Elliott's been he's answered the questions in that. In the playoffs and during the season. So I think they have what it takes to finally make it to the Cup final and win it this year.
Yeah, and again, going with one goalie, that's what you got to do. If you talk about goalies too, in the East, we have an interesting situation. Game one was already played between Pittsburgh and Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay already out, without Stamkos, obviously, and Strawman. But in this game, you see Bishop go out. X-rays came back negative on his knee. They're saying he's day-to-day. Don't know if he's going to play in game 2. But they go on and win this game, Eddie, 3-1. Kind of a crazy game. Callahan takes a big hit and run at Letang. He gets a 5-minute major. The Penguins can't score on that, big power play. Tampa Bay ends up getting some goals and getting ahead, and they end up winning this game 3-1 in the first matchup in the Eastern Conference Final. So it's going to be interesting on this one to see how it plays out, because there's also word that Stamkos may come back in one of the later games in this series too.
Yeah, and you look at that injury with Bishop and him having to get stretchered off. It looked just like he was done for the playoffs. But I mean, it's extremely lucky for them that he is day to day right now. He might not start game 2, but I mean, the fact that he's not ruled out for the whole playoffs right now is huge for them if they're going to make a real run at this. And kudos to Vasilevsky for coming in and doing really well. And there's 2 rookie goalies in net this late in the playoffs. You don't really see that often, with Matt Murray out in net for Pittsburgh, obviously because Fleury's been out with a concussion and Murray's been playing some really good hockey, and now Vasilevsky has to come in for Bishop. So it's kind of an interesting situation in goal in that series. But yeah, I mean, Tampa Bay has been fighting against it all playoffs. They've had no Stamkos. They've had no Strawman. The Kucherov has been great for them. Johnson has been good. Drouin, like we mentioned all along last podcast, has come back and done amazing for them. So, I mean, it's a great story in the playoffs, and they're really doing it as a team. And they have a real shot here, going up 1-0 against Pittsburgh, taking away. I think they took away home ice from Pittsburgh. I think it was played in Pittsburgh in game 1. So now. They've got a good chance to go up 2-0 and go to home with a 2-0 series lead here.
Yeah, and what do you think? We talked about this. You're right, by the way. They did win on the road. So, what do you think, though? Before the series started, we both thought Pittsburgh would win. Do you think they still will, or does anything from game 1 change your mind as to who will win the series or how far it'll go?
I still think Pittsburgh can win this series. I think it's going to be close. I think depending on how quickly Stamkos comes back, obviously they've shown they don't need him in the playoffs, but he would definitely help their chances. But Pittsburgh played a really sloppy game in game 1. Letang got kind of run from behind on Callahan in one series, and that threw him off his game. But I think they'll come out strong in game two and win game two, and they'll be tied at one. And from there, it's still anybody's series. I still give a slight edge to Pittsburgh. I think, I really think they're going to do it this year, move into the finals to play St. Louis. But, I wouldn't be surprised if Tampa came out and won this series.
Yeah, I agree with you. I really think this series is going to go 7 games. I think it's going to go the distance. And I lean towards Pittsburgh winning this one, but I wouldn't be, like you said, I wouldn't be surprised if Tampa Bay pulls it out. Like you said, they've already faced adversity the entire playoffs, and they've been winning. I didn't even have them getting this far in my bracket, so they've been doing it. But also, you can't discredit Pittsburgh taking out Washington. Obviously, they know they played a poor game one. They had opportunities to jump out ahead. They could have gotten 1 or 2 or 3 goals in that first period to really jump out ahead and take control of the game, and they weren't able to do that. And then even with Bishop going out, they were, Tampa Bay was still able to build a lead and win. So they know they can play better against in game two, and I think they're going to come out stronger in that. And like you said, most likely tie it up. But it's going to be a fun series to watch. So is San Jose and St. Louis. I'm not really rooting against anybody. Maybe the Sharks a little bit, obviously, because they're the Ducks' rival, and we don't want to see them get up there. But it's going to be fun. If the Sharks do make the final, though, I am kind of wishing that they did, because I may try to go to one of those games. San Jose is obviously, it's not down the street from Anaheim, but it's not far on a plane ride. So if they do make it, I might try to go to one of those Stanley Cup Final games and watch that, regardless if it's Tampa Bay or Pittsburgh or whatnot. So it's going to be fun. I'm going to try and, watch as many of these games as possible. I wasn't able to watch the first Pittsburgh one. Obviously had some personal things going on this week, as some of you have seen on my Facebook, and things going on, all good stuff with my family. But it's going to be fun, Eddie, watching these last two. Obviously disappointed that the Ducks are not in it, and that we're sitting here talking about, who we're going to keep on the team and who's going to be the coach and those kind of things. Obviously it's going to keep us busy for the summer, watching that and giving the updates. And, you and I'll have plenty to talk about. It seems like every week something comes up, someone says something or someone gets moved, and it's just going to be interesting. I really want to see if any other names pop up in Anaheim. Like I said, maybe Dallas Eakins is another name that might get thrown around more with the goals, getting knocked out by Ontario, unfortunately, in this last week.
Yeah, and quickly going back to talking about watching the playoffs right now, it's going to be a little bit more exciting for a couple people here, because we haven't really updated in a little bit, but the bracket challenge obviously is still going on. I'm done. I believe Mike's probably done too.
Yeah, I'm done.
It looks like there's pretty much only 3 people, and I guess really 2, because one person has second and third locked up with 2 very similar brackets. And it's pretty much between them right now. We have guy's account name is TBL with 3 exclamation marks. He's in first right now with 176 out of 200 points. And he's got St. Louis and Tampa Bay in the final. And both of these people have predicted the Final Four perfectly. So he's got St. Louis and Tampa Bay, and Dale 7238 has San Jose and Pittsburgh. So somebody's gonna win it, and whoever gets that right, it's gonna be one of them who moves on to the final and obviously ends up winning the jersey in the end. But so we're down to 2 people now. So it's sorry for everybody else who's on the outside looking in. Obviously, I'm in the same boat with you, but we're winding down here, and it's gonna be a little bit more exciting, I guess, for them to watch these last few games.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure a lot of people in our bracket with the Ducks getting knocked out and Washington getting knocked out, I know that really, messed up a lot of the bracket and changed things around. But yeah, it'll be down to those 2 and see who wins. And obviously we'll post that when we find the winner and get their jersey done for that contest. And also second and third are still going to win stuff as well. So, we'll just keep our eye out. We've got, at least a couple more weeks to go before everything gets at least to the final, and we figure out who the last 2 teams are going to be. So it's going to be fun times. We're still going to, follow everything that's going on in the month of May. And if you want, I know the goals are gone too, but there's you still have the IIHF going on right now. Perry's been doing well, scoring some goals. Canada's been, dominating their 5-0-0. You have Finland that's also winning in that 5-0-0. And then Russia, who you can't discount because now they've got Ovechkin on there too, Eddie, and they're 4-0-1. So it might be one of those three teams that wins this tournament right now.
Yeah, and Russia just picked up Ovechkin and Kuznetsov. Canada, like you said, is undefeated. So is Finland, and I mean they're in the same group. So by the end of the group stage, one of them's gonna have to lose because they're gonna play each other coming up in a few days. So that's gonna be a good game for sure. But there's some really good players here, obviously at the World Championships. Perry's playing for Canada. You've got Barkov and Patrick Laine is obviously playing for Finland, and he's projected to be one of the top two picks. And Austin Matthews is playing for U.S. and he scored today too. So it's a fun tournament to watch this year. I usually don't watch it, but it's a little bit different with obviously being able to see two of the top draft prospects playing in the tournament and doing so well. And it's an interesting one to watch this year. So if anybody gets a chance, Finland's a fun team to watch. Obviously, you can watch the U.S. For most of you listening are probably from the U.S., so you can watch them too. And even if you can't catch a Canada game, because their games are usually pretty fun. Most of the guys all play in the NHL, so it's a pretty fun tournament this year.
Yeah, and then coming up in September too, you have the World Cup of Hockey, which that'll be even probably more exciting because there'll be more regular NHLers in that. So that's the other thing to look forward to. Obviously after the draft and all the free agency madness that's going to come up. So with that, I mean that's pretty much the show for this week. We're also having a sale too on our hockey stuff. If you get a chance, you can go to dnphockey.com, put in the code 50 off, so 50 OFF, and everything's 50% off right now. So we're trying to blow out some of the stuff for this year. We had some more shirt ideas that we were going to do for the playoffs, but unfortunately with the Ducks going out, we just decided to hold off, on that because we'll just wait till next season and see what happens with this roster and how the Ducks do, Eddie. But we'll be busy this summer for sure and keep you up to date. And thanks for listening as always.